So I'm just gonna say a few words about the Draft Animal Power Network because this is offered by this wonderful nonprofit that I work for. And so our goal is to create content, educate people, and create link between mentors and people who want to learn more about the use of draft animal power. Either oxen, horses, mule, or anything else, dogs. So yeah, we want to be the link. We want to try to be a good link for people who do that, who are interested and maintaining this knowledge and letting it evolve through the seasons. So here we are tonight. I'm interviewing someone who has a really, really important impact in our community, in his community, in our global community, Ted Russell. Thank you for being here. And we want to hear about your organization too and what its goal is, and because it's a sister organization of ours, and we really, really, really love the work you guys are doing. So let's hear it out.
Yeah, so the Green Mountain Draft Horse Association is basically the Vermont organization, but we have a lot of members from New York and New Hampshire. And it's similar to DAPNet in our goals. I uh, hadn't thought about that this was going to come up, so I don't have our mission statement in front of me, but we have a Facebook page and a website, and I'm sure they're on there. And for me, it's been a valuable resource for 40 plus years. And we have some great events every year, and we have a great community of great people. So many, so many wonderful people that we have a few active members who volunteer for our events who have nothing to do with horses. They, they, they just like being with us. And the next event coming up is this coming weekend. We have our beginners clinic, and it's at Shelburne Farms. Every year, has been for probably 30 years or something. And for probably 20, it's been organized fantastically well by Jean Cross, who a lot of you know. And she puts on great meals and has everything organized. It's a really good, fun event, and a lot of people uh, want to do it. It fills up every year, which is a good sign for me. It's one thing that gives me hope that she has to cut off the attendance every year because it fills up. I think, I'm not sure how many we have this year, but probably 45 or something like that. We typically have about 7 teams and about 7 people per team. And it'll be Saturday and Sunday. And then the next thing is May 10th is our annual auction, and that's at the Addison County Fair and Field Days site. And it's a draft horse auction, but we don't get too many horses, but we get a lot of horse-drawn equipment and all sorts of horse-related tack and whatnot. And anyone is welcome to bring anything horse-related that they would like to sell. That's May 10th.
Great. I'm excited to join. I'm gonna also say a few words about how the chat works. So if we have questions about, the event that you just presented, or if you share a story and we have questions, you can raise your hand online. If you don't find the button, you can either unmute yourself and politely try to sneak your question into the conversation, or you can, because we're not a lot of people, that's why I'm saying this, or you can write your question in the chat and I'll try to put it up. So I have a PowerPoint here, and Ted, you tell me if you want to switch slide, or I'm just gonna have the first slide on, and then we can go through the pictures after, or at some point, or you can tell me look for that picture and we'll look for it. How does that sound?
Sure.
Good. This is a lot of technology for me. I hope this is working for everyone. All right. So for my first question is, can you just broadly introduce yourself and how you started with horses, like in general, and then we can have like different stories or questions that we can ask from that.
Well, as far as starting with horses, that's why I gave you that first grade picture. Can you pull up pictures that you want to pull up? Or
Yeah, I can do that. This
uh,
one?
yeah. Well, but the reason I put it up is the part that's not showing that the sweater is that's unfortunate. uh,
I'm sorry.
sweater, the sweater features horse heads, and it's a pattern that I picked out. My mother knit that sweater for me because I picked out this pattern that had horse heads on it, and that's when I was 5 years old. So that's
Wow.
I've been horse crazy, but uh, and I got to play around with horses a lot when I was a kid, riding horses mostly, but we had um, Josie brought the picture itself over.
Oh,
Uh,
that's gonna be better.
that you there now you can see the horse heads, right?
Yeah.
So uh, we this farm was my great great grandfather's and came down to me through my forefathers. But we skipped a couple generations actually of farming, and uh, the farm was rented out when I was a kid, and it was rented to my neighbor Kenneth Ketchum, and he still used a pair of horses. And so he would let me ride around with him. This is when I was like 4 years old or something, 4 or 5 years old. He would let me ride around, and I loved it. And so one of my earliest memories is seeing that he was down here. I think he was harrowing across the street, and Kenneth's here. I want to go ride with Kenneth. And my mother said, "No, it's nap time." And that was probably because I had little sisters and they had to get us down. And so she made me go in my bedroom. But I waited till the house was quiet and I snuck out and I snuck down across the road. And I didn't mention we live on a bad road. And my mother was very easy, except for crossing the road. You did not, that was her one commandment. You did not cross that road without an adult. But I snuck across, Kenneth, Kenneth, and he put me up in his lap. And I'm riding around having the time of my life. And all of a sudden he says, "Uh-oh, Ted, here comes Marge." And she was coming down across the field. And of all things, she was using a piece of driving line, had a piece of driving line folded up to let me have it with because I had snuck out and snuck down across the road. But Kenneth was an early inspiration starting then when I was about 5 years old. And he would, you know, hire me, which is a joke. I couldn't even pick up a bale of hay. I would roll the bales together and ride with him, and supposedly was helping him hay. But so then I had riding horses. I did a little local showing, and the local shows would be the same kids every weekend, at a different town, different show, all the same kids. There were about 15 of us, and it was all girls except for me and Jimmy Buzzle. It attracted a lot more girls. I think that might still be true. I'm really happy to see that when I first started with the draft horses, it was mostly men, but I'm really happy to see that now I think it's probably majority women, and that's a really good thing. But
Yeah.
as far as the draft horses, Josie and I got together in 1974. We're April, this month is 50 years that we've been together. and we moved here I have a little off-grid log cabin up on the hill, and we moved here. And about then is when the oil embargo started, and there was a shortage of gas, and the price zoomed up to 50 cents a gallon, and everyone was like, couldn't believe it, 50 cents a gallon. and and I loved horses anyway, so I really wanted to start doing it with horses. And
So the farm was not rented anymore. You
it,
just moved it.
right at that point is when I came home, is I told the renters that, I wanted to give them fair warning that I was taking over. And I did take over. And
And between the age of 15 to that age, did you still have riding horses, or and what did
no,
you show?
there
Did
was
you jump?
I showed, no, I didn't jump. I only showed Western. And
Western, okay.
that was from like, okay, I'll tell one more, a couple of little stories.
I want to know that.
My,
I'm
my,
curious.
my uncle dropped off a pony here and put it in our pasture. And he said, "Don't be fooling around with that pony unless there's somebody around." And I said, "No, I won't." As soon as he was out of sight, I was out there, and I jumped on the pony's back, bareback in the pasture, and he ran and then stopped and pitched me off over his head. And that was one of my first experiences. And then he sent me to get the cows, which the day pasture was way off away from the barn. So he sent me to round up the cows and bring them back. And they had a buckskin horse in the pasture, Blondie, that was hanging under a shade tree, and we're probably at least a quarter mile from the barn. But I convinced her to walk over next to this rock, and I jumped on her back. No, no bridle or anything. And she took off running the same way. She ran for the barn, and I thought sure I was going to die, but ran down through a gully and jumped a brook and up the other side. And when we got to some green grass, we were getting close to the barn, and we got to some green grass, and I bailed off. I had to walk all the way back and gather up the cows and bring them to the barn. And I'm thinking, well, my uncle's going to kill me. He's going to be so mad. But I got there and he never said a word. However, within a week or so, my cousin, his daughter-in-law, asked me if I would like to learn to ride. And it never occurred to me until I was grown that probably Uncle Wilson went to my cousin Connie and said, "You better teach that kid what a bridle and saddle are. He's going to get killed." So my cousin Connie was wonderful and taught me to ride, and I showed from 7 or 8 years old to till I discovered girls when I was about 15, probably. And
Yeah.
then I got sidetracked until Josie and I came back. And actually, there was one more after that we when we graduated from high school, two of my friends and I decided we were going to build this log cabin up on the mountain behind in the woods on the farm here. And we didn't have any money. There was no road to this spot we picked, but my sister had a half pony, half quarter horse named Pugsley that was hanging out in the pasture. And I use this as an example to young people to just go for it, because we didn't know anything, and Pugsley didn't know anything. But there was old harness hanging in the barn, and I put one of those on him. And between us, we figured out how to skid those logs, and skidded all the logs for that log cabin. So there was that break in my uh, there was that window inside of my break from horses that Pugsley and I skidded the logs for the cabin.
I mean, yeah, ponies, right? A little bit more accessible than 18 hands, big drafts. Yeah. And so when Josie and you got back to the farm, how did you get your first team? Like, how did it happen? How did she accept it? Did she want it too, or did you have to?
Oh, no, that was Josie and I have always been, they talk about alcoholics enabling each other, you know?
Yeah.
Josie and I enablers. The whole 50 years, it's been like, oh, did you see that horse? What a nice horse. And the other one will say, yes, I think you should have that horse. And
Sounds
so
like a healthy relationship.
we're pretty bad that way. But Josie's different. Josie gets really attached and loyal to her horses. And so she's had three over 50 years. And her horses tend to go into their 30s and they're joined at the hip for the whole time. Mine has been more that I, I've picked up horses with problems or raised horses. And when they got going really good and I could see that I could get some money for them, I would pass them along. And, I've had some teams like Lucy and Amber that had done everything and been everywhere and everybody knew them. And then I sold them to Shelburne Farms and people were like, you sold Lucy and Amber? How could you sell Lucy and Amber? And I'd say, well, if I had kids, and I would hope that someday they'd go off to college and not live at home their whole lives. And my ego isn't so big that I don't think someone else could take as good a care of them as I do. And they've graduated to Shelburne Farms. So that's pretty much the way it's been. Uh, and I really enjoy the challenge of getting them going. And
Mhm.
then when they're steady and all, it's I'm looking for my next challenge. And
Right.
uh,
And
so this is my first team that you pulled up, and boy,
yeah,
I was dressed for the photographer, wasn't I? Wow.
that was my comment when I saw the picture. Looks like you had been farming all day. It looks real, you know? And I see you had deering harnesses. Was that a choice or was that just like the
It
first
was
one?
it was traditional around here. I don't know if I knew there was any other kind of harness.
Mm-hmm.
That harness was a neighbor who had hung it up in his barn in the 50s, but it was in good shape. And I traded a hay elevator for it. That's the way it's always been with me, that trading. Um, Lucy and Amber that I mentioned, uh, their mother was given to me, and Lucy, I built, I can't remember, 400 feet of high tensile fence for Lucy, something like that. And so that's kind of the way, actually, that's true of almost all of my horses that uh, we've had some Morgan crosses that were from a Morgan stud that I raised that I traded 500 bales of hay for. And um, actually, this horse on the offside, the right hand horse, Bess, I had the near horse, Toby, and I was jonesing for a team so bad. And this horse dealer in our area, uh, Beaver Mitchell, found out that, and he came by with that horse Bess in his trailer and said, hey, I heard you looking for a horse. I said, I don't have any money. I don't have any money. He said, well, I want to leave her here. I think you're going to realize you got to have this horse. She's such a good horse. I said, well, you leave her here if you want, but I don't have any money. So he left her off, and I hooked her with Toby for a week, and we had a wonderful time. And when he happened to show up was a Sunday morning when I was wicked hungover. And I remember just sitting dying next to the barn with him. Come on, what do you got? What can you trade? Blah, blah, blah. And in the end, I traded a boar pig and two open Holstein heifers and $125, which I had, I don't know, I think a month to come up with for Bess.
Nope, it's a lot. I
It
mean,
was a lot at the time.
yeah.
But
So I bet it was a good horse.
she was a good horse, but she had a thing where if you left them standing, she would keep nudging the other horse. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. And so she caused my first runaway. I had learned from Kenneth Ketchum his thing with his horses. They were older and had done everything and worked every day, and they were like so happy for a chance to stand that if he needed to work on the baler, he'd just pull them up to a windrow of hay and he'd leave them for however long and they'd just stand there munching hay. So I did the same thing with Toby and Bess one day, and I looked over just in time to see Bess, and I started running for them. But before I got there, she convinced Toby, and they took off. No harm on that one, but uh, it was my first runaway. It's very memorable. They're
What
all
were they hitched on?
they were hitched onto a hay wagon with a part of a load of hay, and that's the picture I have in my mind is this load of hay with this pair of horses running across the field and bales flying everywhere. But they just ran back to the barn and stopped at the barn.
Right. Because you did you do loose hay or you did baled hay with
My,
a
my very first year haying, I didn't have a baler, and the old hay loader was still here. And so I did do loose the first year, but it only took 1 year for me to become convinced that I had to scratch up the money for a baler. It's it's a lot of work and it takes up a lot of room, loose hay, if if you're really trying to put in enough to feed a bunch of animals.
yeah. Yeah, if you have more than a barn full of animals or a small barn full.
At the time, I was raising dairy replacements and sheep, and so I did need quite a lot of hay.
And it's hard to separate your like different cuts too. I mean, it's doable, but it's um and so that was your first team. And did you keep them for longer, or you did the same thing as you did with all the other teams you had after that?
Actually, I had a heartbreaking accident with Bess. Our barn is pretty traditional that it's earth set on the north side. It's lots of south windows. It's really nice that way. And the earth set lower floor was the dairy, and the horses were upstairs. And so when I came back and started farming here myself, I replanked the floor in the horse barn and started using it. And Bess had Stringhalt, and apparently at some point when I
Do
wasn't there,
do you mind explaining to those who don't know what a string hall is?
well, Stringhalt is a neurological thing, and one of the, I guess, earlier symptoms is that when they back up, horse with Stringhalt is apt to jerk their back leg. They'll raise it way up and almost pound it down. It's a it's a reaction that, and that's about all I can explain about it. If you look up Stringhalt, you'll find a lot more than that about it. But uh, and eventually it spreads, and eventually it's crippling. But she had it a little bit where you would only notice it if you backed her up. So if you're checking a horse for Stringhalt, that's a good way to do it. Back them up, and they may jerk their back leg. Apparently she did that, and apparently there was a big knot in the plank where she did it, and she went down through the floor up to her hip. And it involved veterinarians and tractor buckets and ropes and things getting her out, and she died just as we got her out. It was one of the most tragic things. You know, it's one thing to have an animal die from some natural cause or something, but to feel responsible is just awful, heartbreaking. And that's the best story. Toby, I ended up with a team that he didn't really fit in right with, and so I sold him to an older gentleman that wanted a single horse to do things with. He went to Dr. Brew, And he and Dr. Brew were good buddies until Toby's end.
And so that was your most tragic story about losing a horse. How old was she?
My second most tragic. I won't bother you with the other one.
Well, it is story time with Ted Russell.
Well,
You won't bother us with
well,
tragic
that's a
stories.
question. Do you want to hear the sad ones or just the glad ones?
We want to hear all of. I want to personally. I want to hear all of them.
Okay. Well, that'll be a long session then. Uh, I love having the babies. And so after these two, I was jonesing for mares that I could have babies. But, this leads to another little bit different subject that my whole career with them, it's gone in cycles. And this was a period that was a relatively high cycle. Like I said, the gas scare and everything got a lot of people interested again in draft horses, and they were considered really expensive at that point. By today's standards, they weren't, but they were. But then everyone, when they're high like that, every mare that will stand gets bred, and you end up with all these foals. And eventually, everybody that wants a horse has one, and then it crashes again. And that happened, especially with Belgians, a little later on. And so you couldn't really justify breeding them. But Clydesdales and Shires were bringing a little more, especially Shires. At that time, there were only a couple hundred Shires in the whole country. And so, because I wanted to have babies and there was a breeding up program for Shires, here is a little story. uh, a couple towns over, there was a logger who was famous for being really hard on his horses. He was a horse puller and a logger, and really famous, kind of famous for being really rough and hard on his horses. And he had, how did that work? He had brought back a Shire stallion from out west. What Shires there were mostly out in the west, like North Dakota or someplace out there. And he had brought a stallion back and bred a couple mares. So he had this Belgian Shire cross mare. And because he was mean to her, he had made her head shy. And because she was head shy, he had gone to untie her and lost his thumb in a loop of the rope. And so he wanted to sell her. And uh, I was in the right place at the right time. And I ended up with this half Shire mare, Peg. And um, went on from there, trying to breed horses that the foals would bring a little more. And so that was Peg. And who did I end up with a partner? That's why Toby was odd man out, because I had this. She was beautiful. Uh, I felt like she got a lot of the best characteristics of both. We bred her to the Morgan that I traded hay for 2 years in a row, and we got two half Shire or the Shire Belgian cross mare crossed on a Morgan stallion. We had these two bays crossbreds that were beautiful, and they were one of my later teams. And one of them became Josie's horse, Kate, for 35 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm like I'm waiting for the sad story. I'm scared
Well,
now.
I'll tell that one. I uh, yeah, every class of livestock. I know I'm telling you people a lot of things you already know, but every class of livestock, it's like a pyramid. And at the base, you have the actual animals that have some value for milk or meat or to pull plows or something. And at the very peak, you have these animals that are special enough so that people with a lot of money don't care what they pay for them. They're going to own the top. And um, And if you're breeding down at the bottom of that pyramid, you're probably fooling yourself if you think you're making money. But the closer you can get to the top of that pyramid, the better chance you have of making money. This is my thought. And so I had Clydesdale mares. My teams were a couple different versions of Clydesdale mares for many years. And Lucy and Amber was the one I had mentioned that were a great team, that we had done the wagon train that went the length of the state, the bicentennial wagon train. They had done everything. And I decided that I was going to sell them and try to buy a Clydesdale mare that was up towards the top of that pyramid. And so Shelburne Farms, they had a great children's barnyard and a great manager, Don Campbell. And I said, you guys hire me for all these events. Why don't you buy my horses and I'll show you how to use them? So that's what happened. And I took that $5,000 and I studied up on the Clydesdale bloodlines. And I went to the National Show and Sale, which is in Springfield, Illinois. And it's worth going for. It's such a wonderful event because it's in April and it's warming up and it's kind of sunny there. And it's at the Illinois State Fairgrounds, which has all these low brick buildings that are all stalls, lines of stalls, and a street. And for that whole 3 or 4 days, the only thing on that street is Clydesdales. And there'd be a couple hundred of them. It's a wonderful event. And I had the catalog and I had studied and decided I was going to try to buy a 3-year-old mare that was bred for when she turned 4. And I had them all marked down in the calendar and I studied and studied. And there was one that was the daughter of a national champion and she was bred to a national champion. And I hadn't bothered to mark her in my calendar because those people got $10,000, $12,000 for their horses every year. But she was the 4th horse sold at 8 o'clock in the morning and there was hardly anyone there and no one was bidding. And I said, Josie, I think I'm going to bid on this horse. And I ended up getting her for $4,600, which they told me afterwards the only reason they didn't no sale was because they already had another horse with them. They had sold into Canada. They had the papers to take her into Canada and everything planned out. And it was just no way. They didn't have the papers to take this one, something like that. They felt it was almost impossible for them to no sale her. So I brought home this super well bred, and she was beautiful. She was 18 hands. She had the best feet of any horse I ever owned. And I had a couple foals, and a lot of it is your name, and I was just starting to have people recognize my name. I convinced this lady who had the current national champion, a real young horse, and hadn't shipped. I was having to use ship semen. I convinced her to try ship semen and to ship it to me. And so I had this mare bred to this rock star horse. And I weaned her foal. It was in November. And right when I weaned her foal was the first weekend of deer season. And a tradition that we have a few friends going back 30 years, we have deer camp that first weekend. And so I left Josie and people that work for me in charge and went to deer camp. And in order for the foal to not be so panicked, I left the foal in a box stall and I left Julep in the standing stall next to her. And because Ann Harper had taught me this, I had no mangers or anything because she taught me that it's not that safe to have all this stuff in the stall that they could get a foot caught in or whatever. So it was just a stall with a ring in the middle of the wall and but unfortunately a chain hooked to a good halter. And I happened to be gone for overnight, and Josie was in a band, and she happened to be gone at a gig when the person who lived in the apartment upstairs heard this terrible crashing in the horse barn. He knew nothing about horses, but went in and saw that the mare was hung up, looked in the yellow pages and called the first vet he saw, who happened to be our vet and happened to only be a couple miles away. And he came and he said when he got there, the mare was still alive and he broke her loose, but right then she died. And I and it was because she put her head down to eat some hay or something and managed to pick it up with the chain around behind her neck. And he said that she just pulled so hard in the wrong direction that she cut off her own windpipe and suffocated. Uh,
Wow.
and I've said since that it's like if you had a dog that you really loved and you did something bad so that it died and your heart was broken and you paid $4,600 for it. Uh, so that's my other terrible, sad story about doing something that I felt responsible for losing a horse.
So you never, so she was tied in the stall, that's what you said?
He was this. So why I'm saying ever since then, I've made sure that they're tied or their halter is a breakaway or something so that if they pull hard enough, they are going to break loose because she was hooked with a chain with a piece of garden hose over it, so that it wasn't rough, and a bull snap hooked to a nylon halter, and it was too strong for her to break. And she put her head down and somehow brought her head up with that chain
Oh,
going
yeah,
over her head around her neck instead of in front of her.
right.
I
Wow.
can't believe this is the stories you're getting out of me. Come on, Daphne.
Well, I mean, that was sad. Can we
Wow.
get a happy story? Did you, or like, just to get us back up, get our mood back up? I mean, do you have a success story about maybe teaching someone else to work horses and they started their own thing, or
Well, the
it's an idea. You might have other wonderful stories, but I'm dropping this one.
well, when you say that, the one that pops to mind is, and there might be some people that listen to this that knew them, got to know them. Jesse and Gregory Witcher. The word got out that I was interested in someone wanting to farm here. To back up a little bit, I've never figured out how to make a living farming. When I was a kid, the only way anybody around here made a living farming was milking cows. And I love farming, but I never really cared about that part of it. And so I fooled around with sheep and dairy placements and whatnot, but I always had to do something off the farm to support my farming habit. And in recent years, being older and wanting to be able to sit a little later in the morning and drink my coffee, I've wanted someone here, someone young that would take over. And Gregory and Jesse uh, and I got introduced actually by Stephen Leslie. Some of you know Stephen Leslie and his books. If you don't, check out his books. He's written really good books about farming with horses. And they had worked with him, and he gave me their name. And they came here and they tried quite a few things. They had a couple of things that the people that I see that are really successful, a lot of them have in common. And one thing is that the rule or the custom when they were here was that whoever got down there first would do chores, and I never did chores. Gregory was down there, 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were going all day long. They loved it, and they were just going all the time. And the other thing was that they figured out how to do things without spending very much money. Um, by the time they left, they had 5 big greenhouses here, and every one of them he had bought used somewhere, someone that was getting out of it, and he took it down and moved it here and set it up and bought it real cheap that way. So anyway, they tried a bunch of different things, and found out that they were doing really well with cut flowers. And Josie was really talented at it with the bouquets and everything. And they were getting a lot of weddings. And they did so well at it, finally, they concentrated on cut flowers that they were able to buy their own farm. So it was good for them and sad for us. But they were here for 7 years and they did it pretty much all with horses. We've always been a little bit of a mixed farm that I wouldn't want to do it without a bucket tractor, to be truthful. That hydraulic bucket on that tractor is, my neighbor Kenneth, when I was a kid, he'd pile his manure from his dairy all winter long, and all summer long, whenever they had time, they'd be pitching another load of manure on the manure spreader to spread. It'd take them all summer to do that. And so that's just me and actually there are people who work around that. For instance, Jay Bailey. Jay Bailey doesn't have a tractor, never has. He's done it all with horses, but once a year he hires a bucket tractor and does whatever bucket work he wants to do. So anyway, except for that, they were horse drawn. They were farming with horses. And Gregory towards the end bought his own little Kubota, and on his new farm felt that was all he needed. So they're not using horses now. So, but
They're a success story anyways.
yeah, there.
Um,
One of those pictures you have is their little girl Sawyer, who was here. She was 5 when they came, and when they came, I thought that it was kind of unfortunate that they had a kid, because a situation like this, it's almost like you're getting married. You're providing them with a place to live and their livelihood. And so if one of you decides it's not going, and the child's in school, if one of you decides it's not going to work out, you're talking about turning their whole life upside down. And that's a lot harder if they have a kid in school. So I was a little bit reluctant because of that. But before they'd been here too long, I said to them, well, Gregory and Jesse, you guys can leave if you want to, but Sawyer's staying. I was really in love with her.
That's the deal.
And I included that picture of her reading to Mojo. I don't know if you can pull that up.
I'm gonna try. Let's see. I'm gonna do this. Reading. Wait, I know what picture you're talking. I looked at all these pictures.
Number 11. There she is. That was a wonderful horse, Mojo. Our friends Al and Karen Myers had shires up in Heinsberg, I guess is the town, or Ferrisburg is the town. And they had 2 girls. And at one point, Al said, you know anybody that's looking for a beginner's horse? I've got a horse that'd be great. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, because of Sawyer and my niece. And the horse was Mojo, and he had taught their girls to ride, and they'd kind of outgrown him, and he taught our girls to ride too. And he was a sweetheart of a horse. And in this picture, Mojo, you can see Sawyer has a book, and she's reading to Mojo.
So you had a horse for everyone around.
Yeah.
Speaking of horses, did you have the team or like the horse, or like, can you tell us about a horse that has been particular in your life or been the best, or that you would have again and again if you had to work with one single horse or one team?
It's funny, if you're asking if you're asking that I loved, that doesn't have very much to do with how good of a horse they were.
Right.
And I have a favorite, and there's one of those pictures is of a pair of blacks with white socks just on a forecart.
This one, no.
Well, that one, yeah. That's Rock and Rye. They were uh, Clydesdale Hackney crosses from I'm pretty sure they were from a PMU ranch out west. They had RHR freeze branded on their hip,
Oh,
Rotten Horse Ranch, which I think is a PMU, or was it something? They're full brothers, perfectly matched, and they showed up at our auction, and uh, no one knew anything about them. And the guy who brought them said that he had brought them because their owner had was going through bankruptcy and didn't want them to get caught up in the bankruptcy, and that was about all anybody knew about them. And I ended up buying them for $1,000 a piece. And Rock is the right hand off horse here, and he was a little bit nervous and uh, not that personable. But Rye, as far as us connecting, Rye of probably 30 some odd, he's the one. uh, I would jump up on his back, bareback, for no reason other than just to be sitting on his back out in the. It's funny. Been doing that since I was 6 years old, but he didn't run off with me. He would just stand there.
didn't have to jump off of him.
No. But but he was full of life. They were full of life, but uh, controlled. Like he would be almost running in place. He wanted to go so bad, but listening to you and responding to your commands. He was a great horse.
And
Far as the one that has gotten the most notoriety and everything else is the one that I have now, Clayton. Uh, Clayton and Lupin are the team that I've had. They've been my team for 20 years.
okay.
Is that right? Yeah, it's something like that. Clayton is 25, and I got him when he was 3. So I've had him for 22 years. And uh, Clayton, well, all horses, they'll teach you patience if you let them, if you're open to it. And Clayton has been testing my patience for 22 years. Just today, I let him out of the barn into the barnyard. He has to go from there through the gate out into their night yard, and he goes the other way just to annoy me. uh, oh, I have a story that tells how he likes to annoy me, but also how smart he is. Our farm is blessed with a few good springs, dependable springs, and one of them is the source for the horse's water. It's piped to a stock tank, and then the overflow goes out another pipe to flow away so that the ground stays dry. And that overflow pipe, I have put a pipe over the pipe that I've drilled a bunch of holes in uh, so that the pipe won't clog, so that any debris collects on that extra pipe that's over this other standpipe and has the holes drilled in it. So I can just lift that off and I can clean it and put it back on. And that's been their water source for at least 10 years, maybe 15 years, I don't know. And that piece that I take off from there and clean, that's never come off. But the other day, I happened to be down there to clean it when Clayton's getting a drink, and I'm waiting, and he finishes getting his drink, and he looks around and he sees me standing there, and he turns around and he grabs that piece of pipe that is like a screen and picks it off from there and turns around and looks at me and drops it on the ground and then walks away.
Right. Like he didn't know.
It's never happened before, and so he obviously did it to annoy me, but that's Clayton.
Do we have a picture of your current team?
That's the one that says Ted Russell, number one. Yeah.
One.
The the near horse is Lupin, and the off horse is Clayton. And Clayton's 25, and his teeth are worn out, and he's living on the expensive mush that I feed him every day. He's on borrowed time, and so I'm not sure. Lupin's still fine, but she's 20. I'd have to look it up. She's 21 or 2 or something. And Clayton went through our auction, and the guy who bought him, his wife wouldn't let him keep him. So I bought him from him. I gave him what he paid for him in the auction. This was when Belgians were so at the bottom of the barrel. He paid $750 for him as a 3-year-old. So that's what I paid for Clayton. And
Wow.
and Lupin, just a couple years later, a friend, well, Lupin is a PMU foal. I don't know if everyone who watches this will know that's pregnant mare urine. And there's still some big ranches out west that might have hundreds of mares. And because the product is urine, they have draft mares. So they have a lot, and they have to be pregnant. So they are in all winter being collected, but then in the spring, they get turned out with their foals and get to be horses out in the pasture for the summer and get bred back. And then in the fall, that means they have hundreds of foals to try to market. And once in a while, someone back east here will take a stock trailer and go to an auction and bring back a bunch of PMU foals, weanlings in the fall. So this young couple thought they ought to have a pair of draft horses. Apparently didn't know anything, and bought this pair of PMU weanlings and put them out in the pasture and never did anything with them. And Lupin was one, and her partner Daisy. And they got to be 4 years old, and the couple faced up to the fact they weren't ever going to do anything with them and advertised them for sale. But the problem was they weren't even halter broke, and they couldn't catch them. They had figured out that if you were there, they would let you hand feed them. But if you had a rope or anything in your hand, when you lifted that, they were gone. And so people came, but they couldn't catch them. One lady fooled with them and got a halter on Daisy, but then she couldn't catch Lupin, and then she couldn't catch Daisy to get her halter back. And so when I found out about them, Daisy had a halter. I think it's that one that Clayton's wearing. But uh, so then they gave up and they advertised them for free. And a friend said, "Hey, did you know there's a pair of Belgian 4-year-old Belgian mares near you for free?" And so I went and checked them out. I was expecting them to be really skanky, but they were nice mares. But it was November, and we have burdocks. Probably most of you have burdocks, and they had burdocks in their pasture. And Lupin has one of those manes and tails that grows luxurious and really long, and it was like baseball bats of burdock hanging there. And same with their tails, were like baseball bats of burdock, and uncatchable. So, but I decided I wanted them. And fortunately, being November, they didn't have anything to eat in the pasture. So I put my trailer, which is just a stock trailer, in the pasture with the back door wide open and a rope on it so I could stand way back. And I put grain and hay in the front of the pasture every morning. In front of the trailer, sorry. And it took about 4 days, I think, before they both stepped on the trailer at the same time. And when they did, I slammed that door and ran and got my truck and hooked up to the trailer and headed home. And all the way down Route 30, I could feel that trailer going because they were spinning in there. And I got them home and I backed up. I have a round pen and I backed up to the round pen and unloaded them in there and went from there. And actually, it was really pretty easy once they were in the round pen. It it wasn't very tough. And Lupin ended up being great. Daisy was fine, but Lupin and Clayton were like a perfect pair. And Daisy was kind of the odd man out. And it was when Gregory was farming with him. So Daisy was only getting hitched once in a blue moon when we did three abreast for something. So I sold Daisy. But Lupin and Clayton have been my team for, like I said, probably getting close to 20 years.
Wow. So you've started a bunch of horses, and
Yeah, for a while I was having quite a few brought to me. I have the round pen and I have Clayton, who's great for hitching up a horse with first, to go double. And
Mhm.
word got out there. And so, yes, I thought about including some of those pictures. I have pictures of Clayton hooked with everything from a little bitty halflinger. I'm Norwegian fjord, and she was even small for a fjord. Up through to a curly mule. There's curly horses.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of him hooked with a curly mule, and everything else that you can imagine. He's because if if they don't want to go, he's going to drag them along. And if they
Right.
want to run away, they have to drag him, and he doesn't drag very easy. So.
And so when you bring a horse from any place, anywhere, what's your first contact with them? What's the scenario, the ideal scenario, the first contact, if they haven't had a harness or haven't had a halter on, what's your approach on a horse?
Lupin and Daisy are the only ones I ever had that hadn't had any, halter breaking or anything. They're the first ones. But I'm a firm believer in the round pen. I know that it's not available for everybody, but uh, I did it without a round pen for a long time, and now it's such a wonderful tool for that. So that's where I start, in the round pen. Um, it makes it so much easier to get that, you know, uh, that's benevolent despot thing. Somewhere in high school or something, we learned about benevolent despots. Those are dictators, but they're benevolent. And so that always sticks in my mind, that that's the way I want them to see me. I'm benevolent, but I am the leader. And that as long as they do what I ask them to do, life is good. And that attitude is so much easier to achieve for me in the round pen. You'll most or a lot, maybe most of that same things you can do with a lunge rope. And I used the lunge rope a lot before I had the round pen.
You mean like lunging a horse, like any saddle horse?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and I would try to do it in an enclosed area, because obviously if it's a big horse, if they decide to pull away from you, you're going to lose them. But I would try to do it like in my little barnyard, where if they
Unless it's snowy or icy, then you can hold on.
that's true. uh,
Story happened to me.
uh, well, tell your story.
Oh no, we're here to hear yours. I'll tell you my story when we see each other. Um, but I was wondering, so we did your best horse. What was your worst or like the hardest horse to come around or I don't know how you say it, like train.
Yeah, well, the thing that springs to mind isn't necessarily the worst horse, but one of the hardest things that I've had to try to get a horse past is being a halter puller. I mean, if they're a real confirmed halter puller. And the team I mentioned, Lucy and Amber, that I had for years, quite a few years, I raised Amber, but Lucy, the neighbor, raised, and they didn't know anything. And when they trained her to halter, they gradually trained her that if you pull hard enough, you can break. First, she broke the old halter they put on her. Then she broke the bail string they put on her, whatever. And by the time I got her, she was a 5-year-old full grown Clydesdale. And man, if you hooked her to something, she would pull until, well, I would hitch her with a body rope so she couldn't break it up through the halter. And she would pull until she had cut off her wind, I guess, and would lay down, and you'd have to release her so she could breathe. And as soon as she caught her wind, she'd get up and she'd do it again. And I didn't, I learned a better technique after this, but with her, I just could not break her of that. And an old timer, we haven't talked about this. I had a lot of old great mentors, and one of them told me that he had a horse like that, and he uh, only hitched her with a bail string. And that way, on the occasion when she pulled, she just would pull and snap that bail string and like as not just stand there anyway. And so that's what I did with Lucy. I had her for years after that, and I would still use a lead rope, but she always had a loop of doubled maybe or tripled maybe bail string in her halter, so that if she ever pulled back, she would just snap that and stand there as opposed to flopping on her side or something. Um,
Hmm.
but then I had a horse come to me for training that was a confirmed halter puller, and um, I had learned a better technique by then of using a long rope through a ring and letting her pull back. But eventually, you'd get her stopped before she got to the end of the rope. And gradually, this is linked to almost everything with horses, that you want to break it down into tiny pieces. And if it's not working, try to break it down into even tinier pieces. And so the same with her, I would just pull on that like a quarter of a pound, or and then a half a pound and 3/4 of a pound. And I got her so that I could pull as hard as I wanted and she wouldn't have that reaction. But when I sent her back, I told the lady, I'm not guaranteeing that she won't, have a memory someday and do it again. And sure enough, it took a while, but at some point she started doing it again.
Right. Interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, I could use some advice. I'll say that. Um, I started hitching my horse on my forecart, but single horse in front and my young one in the back. And I think the young one learned that if he pulled hard enough, he could flip that cart. And we had an
Oh,
accident where I flipped the cart.
wow.
Um, but he's not spooky. It's not like big accidents or anything, but I'm still like wondering how I could overcome this. But I mean, I'm just gonna, my idea is to change to a heavier equipment that he can't. Because he doesn't pull forever anywhere, but I don't know why he did that. He's like, and he does that sometimes when he's hooked on that cart. But if he's tied to a place, he doesn't do it. So,
Yeah, they do. They're learning all the time. And that it doesn't surprise me if he's learned that he can pull and flip that card over. Uh,
well, I only let him do it once, and then I was like, maybe that's not something I want to do again. But I've seen him, he's pulled the cart on the sides before, and I didn't click before
hold
that.
it to the side. Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to lead to a bigger problem.
Mm.
Um,
And
but so So you'd put them in the round pen, harness them. So what's your process to working a horse? That's
It's a
my
little different. It's a little different than almost everyone else. Uh, and we had a gentleman, another one of my great old mentors, Bernard Moykin. And Bernard had grown up on a farm and all that, but he also had become the guy that standard bred breeders and Morgan breeders, of which we have a lot around, uh, would bring their young horses to him to train to drive. So he had trained hundreds of horses to drive. And uh, I had had a bad experience or two with, like, first, getting them used to wearing the harness and long lining them, getting them used to the commands and everything. And then the very first thing, hitch them up to something single with me on the ground, and maybe that goes okay. And I hook on to something a little heavier. And I'd had a couple bad experiences with getting to that point where you're dragging something single and they run off and you're on foot. And the best you can hope for is to get them to circle by pulling hard, on the one line. And so but then the thing is flying around behind them. And I'd had a couple of bad experiences that way. So I asked Bernie about it. And I said, after you've taught them and you've long lined them, gotten them used to the harness, do you hitch something up single on the ground? And he said, no, no. He said, the last time I did that, I had a stone boat flying through the air about 3 feet off the ground as they circled me. And I said, never again. And so he would get them to that point where they long lined and they knew the commands and all. And then he hitched them with a good steady horse double. That was where he could be on something. And so ever since, that's what I've done. And I'm blessed to have Clayton that I can hitch them with. But I make sure that I hitch them in front of my barn, so they're hitched to the barn, and they've got a barn in front of them, so they can't leave until I tell them to. And I bring a forecart up and I hitch them to the forecart, and then it's set up so that when I unhitch them and I swing them away from that wall, I've got like I don't know, probably almost a quarter of a mile of open field. So I've got a quarter of a mile of open field if I need it to get them under control. Though that's with Clayton, that's never happened. Um, they might they might be a little spooky, but we've done dozens of horses this way, and nothing bad's ever happened. Let's put it that way. Um, I do have a picture of Daisy, the other Lupin's ex-partner. I have a picture of Daisy kind of being dragged by Clayton because she didn't want to go. And she's braced her feet and he's kind of pulling her along. But that's what I do. That's what I do. I have a
did
little
you
I have a little horse here that um, I'm going to train. Actually, I already did it. I drove her in the round pen, long lining her and taught her all the commands and got her so that she would stand and everything. And um, long lined her around the barnyards and the field that I want to hitch her double so there'd be nothing strange to her. But then um, hitched her up with Clayton and we went for a drive and it went fine.
okay? I'm taking notes of all this advice as it's my next
I'm
next
not
step.
saying necessarily it's advice, but it's what I do.
I mean, um, I didn't put anything behind my gelding because I was scared of that. So, like so I'm just waiting to put him next to a nice horse because I have a horse, but an old gelding that shouldn't run away because he can't, or he can, but he's aggressive in harness with other
Um,
horses.
so you don't want to hook your young horse with Fred?
Nope.
Uh,
I'm not taking that chance. But so it's 8:15 And I really wanted to hear about your mentors and the old timers that you talk about before it's 8:30 and we want to get to the questions. So what
Well,
about
I,
that?
Bernard Moykin, he was great. And yeah, when I started, we would have these events, and um, it was all old timers. I was the young whippersnapper, and they would tease me mercilessly, and I just learned so much from them. It was different then. There was no internet. You didn't learn it. There was no YouTube. You didn't. If you wanted to learn something, there was the Draft Horse Primer, Morris Telline's book, which was my Bible. Uh, and other than that, it was find someone who could help you out. And I had a bunch of great ones. And it was the great thing about the Green Mountain Draft Horse Association. Uh, and that is part of in that mission statement. It says something about the sharing and teaching. And so now I'm the old timer, and I'm trying to. What is it? Is it? I'm pay it forward. Is that how that works? That
When you receive before and then you have to give
yeah,
back.
I I try, and I really enjoy it, and it gives me hope. The young people, all of you young people, give me hope for the future. I see so many young people at the DAPNet gathering that are really inspiring to me, that are going this route. And yeah, I'm you all give me hope, and so I'm happy to be involved with the young people. And it's
Works.
another old timer this picture makes me think of is George Ainsworth. He was a great horseman. I'll say that these old timers, the ones that, they weren't all great horsemen. There was a thing back then that some of these guys, the old traditionalists, they wouldn't give a horse any water in the field. Uh, there was this thing among some of them that so they weren't all great horsemen, but there were quite a few of them that were, and George Ainsworth was one. And he's he's was at a plowing, actually it might have been at his farm, plowing event. I think it was a contest, and I was there with a pair of horses, and I was plowing. I was very confident in my horses and my equipment, and it was river bottom soil where there was absolutely no stones. And I felt like I had more control with the lines around my waist. In this picture, I have the line over one shoulder, but I was plowing with the lines around my waist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Instead of over my shoulder. And this old gentleman, George Ainsworth, came up to me and said, yeah, nice team you got there. Said, doing a good job. Said, I was plowing that way one time with the lines around my waist, and I struck a stone and I broke the whipple tree, the evener, and those horses took off. And they hadn't dragged me more than 100 yards before I realized I'd made a mistake.
It's
Uh,
I really can relate to this story as I broke a whipple tree this morning plowing.
and that
That's
was George. He was very, and a lot of these guys, they were very humble about their methods and everything, but they could tell you a story of something their dad did, and they were teaching you a lesson without hitting you over the head with it.
Yep. And that's why we're so thankful to have you at every event and see you and you telling us those stories so that we can know. And well, sometimes I tell my mentor when he gives me advice and I'm like, I just need to learn the mistake by myself sometimes, even though you tell me I need to do it and try it.
Well, that's my advice to young people first is go for it. I talked about how we skidded those logs to that cabin. We knew nothing. And that's not to say don't be careful and all that, but don't let anyone tell you you can't do it for sure, because you can. And,
That's beautiful, Ted.
and I have a little bit of advice for mentoring, for finding mentors. That had a gentleman moved here from Alaska, and he wanted to get into draft horses, and he got my name and he contacted me, and asked if he could help. Sometimes he'd like to learn about the draft horses. I said, sure. But, I didn't call him and say, hey, I need help today. But he would call me. He'd call me probably average once every couple of weeks anyway. He'd call, hey, what are you doing today? And I say, oh, I'm cutting wood. Oh, can you use some help? Can I come help you? And I say, okay, sure. And, and by the time the point came when he knew everything, we could harness the horses and hitch them without saying a word, because he knew exactly how I do it. He had helped me that much. And when it came time for him to get horses, I owed him big time. And I've traveled all over with him looking at horses, and trucked them home for him and gave him advice because he had been so helpful to me. So that would be a piece of advice I would give. If you know someone that you think would be a good mentor for you, don't wait for them to call you. Give them a hand and show up.
Yeah, sure. I like that. Yeah. Um, do you want to go through the pictures?
Sure.
I wish you were closer to Quebec so I could visit and give a hand.
I used to come to Quebec to horse plowing contests because I was so serious about plowing, and I wanted to get as good as I could possibly get. And man, were they good. I would go up to the eastern townships to plowing contests, and those old fellas, oh my word, they spent all day doing that. What is it, 15 feet wide or something? And it was incredibly perfect. And I got to know them, and had a lot of fun with them. So we talked about this one. This is in front of my house. It's like we've mentioned. It's my great great grandfather built the house, and there I am.
But before you change subject, Ted, you should come up and let's bring a team of horses and
Yeah, I
and
never I never tackled the what was involved with getting them across the border. So I never. Yeah, also, I wouldn't have presumed to plow against those guys. They were so good. Um,
well,
I would
time
have.
has changed. I'm sure you there's new faces, I'm sure. Anyways, they have a plowing event near here every year, so. Okay.
This is, let's see, that's Rosie and Sarah. Sarah was, after I bought Julep out of there, I wanted a team. So the next year I borrowed the money, $5,000, to buy her another 3-year-old Clydesdale with famous parentage. And Rosie was her daughter. So that's a mother-daughter team. Uh, yeah, plowing, I guess. Yeah. This is a pair of Suffolks that came through our sale. Again, and another piece of advice, man, horses go cheap through a sale. Take a flyer on them. Probably, you know, you might be all right. Uh, maybe that's not great advice. I don't know, but you saw Rock and Rye, that pair of Clydesdale Hackney crosses, and this is a pair of Suffolks. Um, that came through our sale. No one knew anything about them. Again, they were loaded with burdocks. They had those um, packs of dried manure on their butts that horses get that lay in the shit and don't get taken care of. That's what they had when they came through our sale. And me and a horse dealer, Harry Rourke, were the only ones bidding on them because nobody knew anything, didn't want to take a chance on them. And I could see I was only bidding against this horse dealer. So I stopped bidding at, I think, 1,500. And after the sale, I went to him and I said, hey, I assume you're looking to turn them over. I wondered if I gave you $100 if you'd let me take them home. And he said, make it 200. So I bought that pair for 1,700. And
Wow.
and I later found out where they came from. I don't remember the details. Someone that had them out in the pasture and never did anything with them, and finally sent them to the sale.
Hmm.
They were nice horses, and they again, I got them so they were going great. Had some fun with them. Sold them to a lady that wanted to do sleigh rides. And the following Christmas, she sent me a Christmas card. The boys are doing great, and made me feel like I'd sent them to a good place.
Sure did.
What a
Sure
picture,
sounds
huh? Josie took that picture. It's up in Bristol with those cliffs in the background. This is Josie on her horse Merlin, uh, and that's our barn. It's uh, like I said, it was a dairy downstairs, and oh, and the day Bess died, I started ripping out the cow stanchions downstairs, and that became our horse barn the same day. And so now that whole downstairs where the white windows are, that's our horse barn.
right.
This is Merlin, that same guy, Bernie Moykin, that I talked about. He had a Morgan that came there for training and whatnot, and the people never paid the board, never came back for him. And he bred him to one of his Belgian mares. And this was the offspring. He was a beauty. Um, he got Lyme, and when he was about 6, maybe, and he got over the Lyme, but it triggered an autoimmune problem that we could never get him over, and he'd be on heavy duty steroids. And as soon as we started tapering him off, his joints would swell up, and yet we ended up putting him down young, like 7 years old or something.
Oh, wow.
But he was a beauty.
Yeah.
I made a joke to a friend. Our farm never really had a name. Uh, and they said, well, we got to name it. This is in the 70s. They said, well, how about Prittenere Farm? And then I can put on the sign that I've been gone a proprietor. And that friend had that sign made for me. It hangs in the barn.
That's good.
This is my great grandfather, Clyde. And I don't know the horse. This is again, that same barn in the background. And this is the old house right behind him. And
Oops, sorry.
that's fine. It could be his stallion. I don't know. That was a time when they were sneaking in a lot of standard breds and saddlebreds and stuff into the Morgans because they wanted to get some more leg on them so they'd be faster. And a lot of people were using them for carriage horses, and um, so that could be his stallion, but I don't know. This is the handbill for his stallion, or at least one of his stallions that he and LC Barber, that's the guy in the picture we just saw. And it's just going on about the horse, and then that he's standing at stud at the farm, or one day a week at Dr. So and so's in Brandon, which is about 8 miles away, for $10. That stand and suck. That was common. How it was done back then. You got a foal that would stand and suck, or you didn't know the money.
Oh, wow.
This is the same guy, Clyde, up on the front of the wagon. Um, and that is my grandfather is the very back one on the wagon. The others are probably cousins. And they're wearing fly nets and D-ring harness. And that wagon was still in the barn. Actually, maybe not. We have a wagon, but it's an express wagon, something like that.
That looks like an experienced person who stacked the hay.
Those guys knew
Side,
what they were doing. They knew what they
right?
were doing.
On on wooden wheels, which that's quite a job for the horses too.
You notice the horses aren't very big. When I was young and I was looking for stuff, all of the collars around here. I don't remember ever seeing a collar that was bigger than 22 inches. And when the old timers would come to an event and my horses would be there, they'd say, yeah, we had horses like that back when I was a kid. They were Morgan crosses, and they'd all say the same thing. We had Morgan crosses, and they were tough as nails. They'd talk about how tough they were. And so I don't know if these are Morgan crosses or not, but I wouldn't be surprised. He had Morgans, and you see pictures here that look like Percherons, but I bet they're Morgans crossed on Percherons.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's the picture you talked about. I'm gonna skip through the pictures you talked
Oh,
about.
but I want to talk about this one a little bit. This is draft horse. Um, this is Addison County Field Days, and we do field demonstrations the whole 5 days. That's our county fair here, but it's a very ag-oriented fair. The kids around here all are showing their cattle and sleeping in the cow barns and the sheep barns, and we do field demonstrations the whole 5 days, and we do just about everything you can think of, from all of the haying operations and reaping and binding grain and cutting corn. And um, it's a great event to come and just, see or to be involved with. Uh, it would be great. Anyone's welcome that wants to either come and volunteer or bring animals, bring horses, or um, uh, Ivy Pagliari's been going to bring her oxen the last 2 years, but the last 2 years, both of them, we got so much rain that she ended up not coming. But hopefully, three's a charm, and she'll come this year with her oxen. It's a wonderful event. The end of July, first week of August, Addison County Fair and Field Days.
Noting that down. Same.
Yeah, this is
Why is there a four-cart?
well, yeah, originally there'd have been a horse pole on there and just the driver, but we're doing all different demonstrations. We'll do like 3 rows. We make that acre or two last 5 days. So we'll do a row or two there, and then you'll unhitch the forecart and hitch it onto the corn binder, and we'll bind a couple rows of corn, and then you'll hitch it onto the tedder, and so we just keep rotating around that. And you got your hands pretty full. This way we put anybody that wants to up there on the reaper binder and let them run the reaper binder without having to try to drive horses and run the reaper binder.
Hmm. Mm,
That's
that's the corn.
the corn binder. Yeah, same thing. See, you just unhitched a few minutes ago. This is the next one is uh, Dave Clark has halflingers, and he has normally he's using just a pair, but uh, for this event he was doing 4 abreast, and he's doing the reaper binder. And same thing, we put Randy up on the reaper binder and let Dave concentrate on his halflingers. You can see the ride wagon in the back. The people
Oh yeah.
mover. We do that to give people rides around the fairgrounds. And
Mhm. Oh yeah, that's the same
yeah,
T4.
and this is the hay loader and loading the loose hay. We've got the coolest old. I didn't put a picture of. We call it the chicken scratch tedder. Have you seen one of those? It's like about half a dozen pitchforks that all are going crazy back there, throwing the hay around. We have one of those.
Yeah. I think it's noisy. I like the wooden one better. But you you so it works, is it working better than the wooden one?
uh, it works okay, but the Grim is the standard for horse people around here. The Grim ground drive tedder, this reels that go around.
Yeah.
There's a few of us that now have PTO carts and use modern spinner tedders. But most people, because the Grims were made in Rutland, Vermont, 20 miles from here. So every farm around here had a Grim hay tedder on it.
Huh. Impressive.
This Josie gathering sap. It's Clayton and Fancy. Fancy was, again, back there was a time when the horses weren't bringing nothing. And I bought, well, Fancy was a runaway. That was why, but she was a nice mare and I bought her for $900. I'll throw that out that, I brought her home and I hitched her up with Clayton and said, well, Clayton will calm her down. But she was not calming down by being driven. And so I backed off and I would just bring her out and hitch her to the front of the barn and I'd bring the harness out. And as soon as she saw the harness, she'd start shaking. And so I'd put it away and put her away. And I just gradually from that let her tell me when she was ready for the next step. And it took a while, but I don't remember how long, but she became a very good, steady horse.
Wow. Get to have some patience to
They
work that out.
will teach you patience if you let them.
Hmm.
This is our friend doing the barrel race. When we have events like our summer meeting is usually a field event somewhere doing haying and probably some plowing and whatnot. But we always finish the day with barrel racing. And you can see it's an upside down trash can. And and Martha is barrel racing, and she was due. I forget. I think she was due that day or the next day, and or
That's why she didn't.
maybe she was. I think she was tired of being pregnant, and she thought this would encourage the baby that it was time.
That's funny.
And this is uh, when you get old, you have trouble with names. But this is Amanda Morris with on Kathy Wells Shire. Kathy Wells had ended up with, I think, 6 beautiful shires. And she did work at Shelburne Farms for quite a few years with them. And Amanda and her twin sister, Megan, worked for her, helping her with the horses. So that's Amanda doing a good job on the barrel race.
That's your team. And now questions, because it's 8:39, so we're already past. But if anyone has a question for Ted, you can either put it in the chat. There has been a lot of chitty chat, especially from Matthew, who's sharing um his how do you say experience, and it's pretty interesting too in the chat. Um,
77 at the clinic this year. Wow.
and Stringhalt.
Stringhalt has gotten to be, I think there's a genetic component because um, certain breeds are more prone to it and you're seeing it more and more. I don't know. Again, he's right. You need to talk to a vet, but you do see quite a bit of it.
Yeah, we see quite a bit in here in Quebec. Um, well, I mean, I have 1,000. I didn't even touch the list of questions I had. Don't know if you noticed, but I was just taken away by your stories, and I'm so thankful that you accepted to tell us your stories, and it's so great to see you at every event, and we're so lucky to share, well, that you share knowledge with us, and that we can
Oh,
share our stories. But
I feel like the lucky one. I was at the event last fall, and like I said, it was so inspiring. Gives me so much hope that people came from as far away as I don't know the Midwest. Came a long ways and slept in their car in order to do that. And I I appreciate that so much. That you know, and I will throw out that well, was it Yogi Berra said, prediction is tough, especially when it's about the future. And, and it is. But to me, there's a lot of things pointing to this being a good future to be involved with draft animals and farming with draft animals without getting into too much detail about why. Uh,
Well, I know personally that we have a picture of you with that kid, I can't remember his name, and Erica's mare. And this pictures embodies everything that both our organizations trying to do, and it's beautiful. We all love that picture.
yeah, I think it's Everett. And
Everett.
yeah, and I love that his mom said it was him that insisted that he wanted to come to this thing. He was, he really wanted to come, and so they figured it out for her to bring him. And and I heard from her afterwards that he's already talking. He's coming next year. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that really gives me hope. And
Right.
I really like teaching. I really do.
Well, I can't wait to see you and talk more, and I'll tell you my stories.
Hey,
My bad and good stories.
oh, you have great stories, Daphne.
I
You're
might have just four, or but I'm
great,
working on them.
great and fairly unique stories. Really.
They're all unique in horses, because all horses are so unique and weird. And yeah. So thank you again. And I don't know if you had a maybe a Robert Frost last words. I'm kidding. I mean, you could finish with that if you want.
Oh, look up that one that features the draft horse. Oh, it'll shake you. It'll,
Will do. Will do. That's our homework. Okay, well, thank you again, Ted, and
thanks for
thank you everyone
inviting
for
me.
listening. This will be on YouTube.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Mm.